BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This podcast contains adult themes, very strong language, and language that may offend. Trinidad, Port of Spain, 1975. Early in the morning, after a night of prayer and reflection, a man steadies himself in body and spirit. He hears steps coming down a narrow hallway outside his small prison cell. Rising off the floor from a thin mattress, in a state of reverie, he meets 4 guards. A white hood is placed over his head and his hands restrained. As he is led down the hallway, past his fellow inmates, murmured prayers pervade the morning air, from all except 2. Once friends and comrades, now enemies and convicted murderers, facing the same ghastly fate on death row.
I don't see anything to be terrified about powerful black people. I'm a pretty powerful black man. I'm the most powerful black man in Europe.
Today's case concerns the killing of Joe Skerritt, whose body was discovered in a grave not far from where Gail Benson was also found buried.
A smart man means a schemer, and he was the quintessential schemer.
We haven't got enough heroes of our own. We need them. My children need them.
Nobody says Michael was a saint, but by the same token, I dare anybody to say that he was a devil.
You gotta be twice as good. There's no such thing like equal opportunity. That's bullshit. I'm successful because I'm prepared to work twice as hard and I'm prepared to be twice as ruthless as anyone else.
This is a story about identity, how it's formed, shaped by generations before. It's also about how one can rebel, change the status quo, not bow when expected, and instead forge your own path. My name is Hamza Salmi, and Michael X is a man I've been fascinated by for a long time. Indeed, this podcast has been years in the making, tracking down and persuading those who knew Michael to tell me firsthand what he was like. It has become an obsession to find out all I can about this enigmatic man. Michael's story is complicated and messy. It's full to the brim with contradictions, intrigue, and the intricacy of a life lived to the full. That's originally what drew me to him. But as I found out more, I realized I was reflecting on my own life experiences, being a person of colour here in the UK, and that Michael's life has a lot to say about our present. Born Michael de Freitas, renamed as Michael Abdul Malik, mostly known as Michael X. He's a man who no one wants to claim, and for good reason. He was primarily known as a British Black Power activist, a leader of his time, or at least would claim to be so. But he was much more. A pimp, a gangster, a fraud, a pioneer, a firebrand, and eventually a convicted murderer. A Trinidadian member of the Windrush generation, he transformed himself into an unabashed Black Power advocate, causing consternation amongst the British establishment, thus becoming an enemy of the state. He ran with the likes of Black Power icons Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, Muhammad Ali, and his friends included the likes of William Burroughs, John Lennon.
Michael X said, "We have this youth club. All the black kids want is just some recognition that somebody has an interest in them."
Mick Jagger and Sammy Davis Jr.
Martin Luther King died trying to do enough. The white man sent black men in to kill Malcolm X because he was starting to do a little more than was expected. There is never enough.
In this story, we're going to delve back in time to events which will soon be out of living memory, contentious moments of Black British history, which have constructed our present, moments that make up Michael X's captivating life story. Looking through the prism of his life, I want to show how our nation is haunted by the ghost of the British Empire and its doctrines which linger on, causing division, and which I feel need to be acknowledged. This is Who Was Michael X? Episode 1. Who Taught You to Hate Yourself?
White is pretty. Black is ugly. That is what my black mother used to tell me when I was a little boy in Trinidad. It was her way of saying white people were superior and that we should pattern ourselves on them. It expressed a feeling that too many black people have had for too long.
This is an extract from Michael X's autobiography, voiced by the actor Peter DeJersey. Peter played Michael X in a film called The Bank Job. We'll hear from Peter throughout this podcast, as well as from Michael X himself, where I have recordings, just as we did at the start of this program. Who taught you to hate yourself? Comes from a question the famous Black Power leader, Malcolm X, once posed to a black audience.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?
A rhetorical question, but it begs an answer, particularly when it comes to Michael X. You see, self-hate features heavily throughout Michael's life, but particularly in his childhood and with his mother, Iona. And that is what we're going to explore in this episode. Michael's upbringing, his relationship with color, and how skin shade still plays a pivotal role in our lives today. 1933, British colonial Trinidad. On the outskirts of the capital, Port of Spain, Michael is born to a black Barbadian woman and a white Portuguese man from St. Kitts. His father was rarely around, and he grew up in a black household with his stepfather and his mother, Iona. In those days, he'd have been described as red. Today, we would have said he's mixed race, or we used to say half-caste, a term I'm very familiar with. I'm not mixed race, I'm from Morocco, but with my complexion, kids in primary school would always call me that. Not as a cuss, but just descriptively. It would leave me confused as I couldn't understand what I was half of. Anyways, just to say, Michael was different in his family and amongst much of his community. Growing up in a colonial setting, being half white was an advantage, one which his mother Iona tried her best to capitalize on. For Michael, however, it was a huge drag.
Trinidad should be a great place for a boy to grow up in. But for me, it was all ruined by my mother's hung-up about color. She didn't want me doing anything the black boys did. She didn't want me associating with them. She wanted me to be a little white boy because she didn't make it to be a white lady. She had a long list of don'ts for me, covering just about everything that was fun. And if I really wanted to have a good time, I had to do it behind her back. I'll just run off and take the beating when I get back.
Michael had no ambitions to be white or passing. Passing means pretending to be white in order to enter white society and access white privilege. Sometimes we debate white privilege today, and there are many doubters as to its existence. But what you can't say is that in the time of empire, white privilege didn't exist. It gave access to a better life. You can understand and empathize with a mother wanting better for her son, but those words of black is ugly and white is pretty, they're more than just that. They betray a way of thinking and indoctrination generations deep that finds its roots in slavery, one whose branches still reach out to the present.
Sometimes, black people have our own internalized issues in the same way my father's mother did. And they may say something to me like, oh, you've got such a nice, neat nose, or you have nice hair. And I would always respond by saying to them, thank you. It is because of 400 years of rape. That's a conversation killer right there.
This is Hasina Malik, one of Michael's daughters. You'll hear from her later on in the series. What she's really referring to is not racism, but colorism. Discrimination based on the shade of your skin. Michael's mother, Iona, not only classed herself as inferior due to her own complexion, but also elevated Michael due to his. She was proud of having a light-skinned child. When Michael would have school friends over, she would even pretend to be the cook rather than his mother. But I'm no expert on colorism. However, Dr. Aisha Phoenix is. She's a sociologist and researcher on colorism at King's College, London.
I would describe colorism as skin shade prejudice, in which people with light skin are privileged and those with darker skin shades are discriminated against. And colorism can occur both within and between racialized groups.
Before I sat down with Dr. Phoenix, I thought I had a good grasp on what colorism was and how far it reached. But as we talked, I couldn't help thinking about my own life and what effect colorism had had on me.
Colorism has been a taboo subject that people have been loath to talk about, to explore, because it's seen as airing your dirty linen in public. And I think that's put people off, because I'm sure many people of colour have had experiences. Even if they hadn't had a term for what they've experienced, they have experienced colorism.
My ethnicity is North African. My family is made up of a multitude of shades. In Western society, some would pass for black and others for white. This ambiguity has always left me in the other category, as I'm a real mix. I remember derogatory names being used to label some of my family members based on their complexion. An uncle treated me differently to my brother because I was lighter. And growing up here in the UK, there was this strange oscillation between those with light skin either being treated as if they were more beautiful and inherently had more value, or being ostracized by the black community.
Some mixed race people who identify as black or black mixed race feel excluded from blackness because some black people try to act as gatekeepers to blackness and do not wish to include people who have one white parent, for example. Then that can lead to some black mixed race people working harder to emphasize their blackness, which can sometimes manifest itself in quite essentialist ways. So in conforming to stereotypes around blackness in order to prove that they are black.
Michael challenged his mother's views on colour, even though he benefited from his lighter skin. Michael's mother, Iona, got him a place at an elite private school in Trinidad. But he rebelled, and she regularly chastised him for hanging out with black children, or worse still, Indians, who to her were on the lowest rung of the ladder. At the age of 14, he was excluded from school for bad behaviour and refused to go back. But worse was to come for his mother, Iona. Michael's first girlfriend was black.
"You're not having any black girls in this house," she cried. "You're not going through the trouble I went through. I tried to show you what's good, and you can't take your nose out of the gutter," she ranted. "Always running around with black people. And now you want a black woman?"
Because of patriarchy and sexism, women are disproportionately affected by colorism because of the way in which women in general are supposed to be attractive and their beauty is seen as something that's really important. So if dark skin is seen as ugly, then a woman who's dark is in a very difficult position.
What I find striking is that it's a black woman perpetrating colorism against another black female. What is it that can cause someone to call themselves ugly, but also perpetuate this prejudice against their own kind?
I think it's to do with internalizing the trauma of the prejudice to which she was subjected. So if you're told you're ugly from the youngest age and made to feel ugly and unattractive because of the shade of your skin, then you internalize those ideas and feel that you're ugly. And not only that you are, that your skin is inherently ugly because of its shade.
This internalized discrimination is still with us today. But with Michael's mother, Iona, we need to take into account the period in which she lived and how the colonial environment in Trinidad had a role in creating that mindset. What I'm talking about is white supremacy and how predominant it was at the time. It was the mainstream way of thought. Iona fully understood what colour could do to your life prospects in the Caribbean.
I would say that it's twofold. So on the one hand, you have the fact that white people have the power, but also you have divide and rule tactics. So deliberately, by giving status and power to people with light skin, you're then saying they're above the others, and you're dividing black people then, sowing seeds of tension between black people so they're not unified.
While he lived in Trinidad, Michael benefited from the privilege afforded by his lighter skin. But when he left, instead of being the light one, he became the dark one. Instead of being classed as mixed race or white, he became a black man. For all the hope Iona had for her son to excel and better himself, aged 14, we find him on the docks in Port of Spain looking for work and a means of escape. He loved hearing stories told by old sailors about lands far away, great riches and adventure. He eventually found work on Norwegian shipping lines, traveling to countries such as Canada, Ghana, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, and then eventually making his way to the mother country.
England was home in the mind of every small boy in the West Indies when I was growing up. Land of hope and glory. We sang that song as little boys with the greatest of fervor. I was thrilled with the prospect of seeing the mother country. I didn't know then that it was the first step on the road to disillusion.
In 1952, Michael disembarked at Tiger Bay, Cardiff, Wales.
All the people are happy and gay. They're building new houses in Tiger Bay. But why are these people taking so long? This keeping us waiting is very wrong.
Now, prior to reading about this, I had never heard of it. Tiger Bay sounds like something out of Peter Pan. In some ways, it was a Neverland, a multicultural haven, before that term ever existed, and a great example of what the future of the UK could look like.
The bay was a world of its own, cut off from the rest of the city, a black world. It swarmed with West Indians, Arabs, Somalis, Pakistanis, and a legion of half-caste children. In its food stores, you could buy cassavas and red peppers, and in restaurants, you could eat curries and rice dish just like those in the West Indies.
Tiger Bay, or Bute Town as it's also known, was born out of the port of Cardiff. During its most successful period, sailors would come to Bute Town to set up home, intermarrying with local Welsh women.
My name is Royston Douglas Casanova. Michael Malik is my stepfather. I got some beautiful stories to tell about Tiger Bay. Best time of my life when I was a kid down there. Everybody was happy. They called it wasn't a ghetto. There's no ghetto. It was such a mixture. Because it was all different nationalities. Chinese, Russian, Indian, African, Dutch. We used to swim in there, dive off the ships and go in the water. In the winter, it was warm. You go swimming any time. Police used to chase us. We'd swim across the other side and they'd try and get over there. But by the time they got to us, we was gone. There was girls from the valleys used to come down for a good night out. And they'd all go back home the next day. And they're partying. When a club finish, go back to one of the houses and just party. And the point is, anybody could go there. Anybody could go there. It doesn't matter who the fuck you are, as long as you're not the police. They don't do it now. They don't go climbing up the quarries like we did. But that was dangerous. But everybody down the bay was dangerously in love of going out and doing something, you know.
In Tiger Bay, Michael struck up a relationship with Lillian Casanova, Royston's mother.
But she was a good woman, though, my mother. I got to give her a due. She brought me up nice. But after the time I took no notice, I never had a father, did I? Then she met Michael. And he was like a father, you know, take me here, take me there, go there, do this, do that, you know. We were very close, me and Michael. He was smooth. But he was quiet, he wouldn't say much. And if you say something, you've got to listen first before he answers you. Let them say what they got to say before you got to say anything.
Michael really wanted to stay in Tiger Bay, and so looked for work at the local job centre. He applied for the position of a junior ordinary seaman on British ships, but wasn't successful. He was turned down because crews were segregated. He was told, "We don't mix crews on deck." Employment discrimination was a common experience for people of the Windrush generation, as this panorama clip from 1964 explains.
Now, I suppose it's true enough to say that we are accustomed in this country to seeing coloured people doing semi-skilled or, if you like, rather menial jobs, but woe betide them, it seems, if they try to get something better, perhaps more in line with their education or their training.
I hold a certificate in teaching from the West Indies.
What have you been doing since you came to this country?
I've been employed with British Railways. I started as a wagon oiler, and now I'm a clerk.
I used to be a teacher at home. At present, I'm a conductor with London Transport.
And so, disillusioned and needing to make money, Michael followed a path that many in Tiger Bay were forced down, that of a hustler.
Michael, God rest his soul, he was a bit of a crook. Because he used to sneak out when he lived with my mother. He used to sneak out, gone for an hour or two, and come back with money. People saying, oh, he's a burglar. People who saying he was pimping and this and that. He always had two women, John the Docks. He always had two women, never one. You got to control somebody if you really want money out of them, or do this or do that.
So Michael had women on the docks, and he was living with Royston's mum, all at the same time. Although he was exploiting these women, there was no great wealth involved in this enterprise. But Michael was restless. He had outgrown Tiger Bay. This is a man who had a different suit for every day of the week. He'd already travelled around the world, and in 1957, he decided to become a player in a much bigger city. The biggest city, London. Settling in Notting Hill, that time a notorious slum, Michael was full of schemes. From pimping to gambling to robberies, with brief interludes spent at sea when he could get the work, which he also used as a method of escape from the law and debtors. He hustled around Ladbroke Grove, where he would come to meet the love of his life, Desiree D'Souza.
My mother says that in a party, my dad saw her across the room. He said to his friend, "I'm going to marry that woman over there." He'd not even spoken to her at that point. He just saw her and he said, "That's my wife over there."
I asked her to dance, which was rather stupid because I couldn't dance. It had never been my scene. But we moved around the floor and I talked about my ship and finally got around to asking her if she would come out with me the next day. She said she wasn't sure she could, as she had a child to look after. When Desiree talked to me about the child, I felt all the more attracted to her. I think somewhere inside, that was the thought of my father, who was also not around when I was a kid.
They moved in together to a dilapidated home on Southam Street, after looking outside the slums, but with no luck. Racial discrimination for accommodation was common, and that's why poor areas such as North Kensington became centres for immigrant communities, where undiscerning landlords charged higher rates for the privilege. Despite the circumstances, they were happy and in love. Desiree pushed him to go straight and give up pimping. In 1959, she fell pregnant and immediately Michael proposed, and they married shortly after. Michael wrote to his mother Iona to give the good news, and she wrote back saying she would leave Trinidad and come and live with them in London, which Michael discouraged with a number of excuses.
To my horror, her answer to this was another letter, in which she said that she had put up her house for sale and was definitely coming, and she wanted to take care of her future grandchildren. Desperation moved me to send a cable to Trinidad telling her there were problems of race in this country, that she shouldn't dream of coming under any conditions. The next letter I received said her passage had been booked.
Michael went to collect his mother Iona from Waterloo train station. It was a hot summer day. The train arrived with many new migrants, but walking along the platform, he couldn't find his mother. He was relieved until he heard a voice screaming, "Mikey!" He turned to find his mother dressed in a red quilted bathrobe. Someone in Trinidad had sold it to her as an overcoat for the notorious English weather. Embarrassed, Michael hailed a cab and took her home.
When we finally reached the house, Desiree was there to meet us, dressed in her best and looking very nervous. My mother looked right past her as if she didn't exist. I said, "This is my wife." My mother halted dead in her tracks at my words, and her mouth sagged open and her face fell. I had completely forgotten to tell her I was married to a black woman.
Desiree's surname being D'Souza, Iona had assumed Michael had finally seen the light and decided to marry a white woman of Portuguese descent. A distraught Desiree burst into tears, and a horrified and shocked Iona took out some rum from her suitcase and simply said to Michael, "Let's get drunk." In the next episode of Who Was Michael X, we'll learn of the fallout between Desiree and Michael's mother Iona, and how the fledgling black community in Notting Hill, of which Michael was now a part, fought for its survival. The issue of colour was not going away, and it ignited one of the most important moments in black British history, the Notting Hill riots.
If the English people didn't want us, they should send us back to Africa when they finish using us as slaves.
And from those spoken words, I said, start bomb them. You see the Molotov cocktail bombs coming out.
Who Was Michael X was presented, written and produced by Hamza Salmi. Featuring Peter DeJersey as Michael X, assistant producer Wayland Mackenzie, researcher Palumi Odubanjo, technical producer Tim Heffer, theme music by Kyron Akau, production mentors Claire Walker and Joe Kent, executive producers Kalik Mir and Leanne Ali, commissioned for BBC Sounds Audio Lab by Kalik Mir.